every day at 4 o'clock to hear our next guest. That's John McMullen, as he is our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider and also covers the league nationally for FanRagSports.com. 4th of July, John, but you were still working sort of as news breaks about Nigel Bradham, and now we get to learn from you what deferred prosecution means.
Well, it means Nigel's not going to jail unless he's really in that simple minds category, because this is a clear path where if he does what he's supposed to, he'll get charges dropped in all likelihood. And so from a personal standpoint, it's obviously a big deal because he was facing assault charges and potential jail time. So that's certainly big. But I think people heard that and automatically assumed everything's fine as far as the NFL goes. But the NFL is not beholden to any court. They can still penalize Nigel Bradham, and there's still a likelihood that they might under the personal conduct policy. So he's far from out of the woods as far as the NFL goes.
You also write on our website, 973ESPN.com, about that personal conduct policy, and I'm guessing from your sentence in the story that the personal conduct policy, maybe I'm sure at one point it didn't exist at all. Now it's up to a floor of 6 games, so that personal conduct policy is no joke. How has that evolved over the years since it was maybe first implemented, and how they work it now?
Well, the problem, and that's been the problem with the personal conduct policy from the beginning, unlike the substance abuse policy, for instance, it's not structured, and there's never been consistent penalties, and that's where the NFL has often gotten in trouble because it's really come down to the whim of one man, and that's Commissioner Roger Goodell. Everything started to change during the Ray Rice incident, and obviously he suspended him originally for 2 games and sort of got so much backlash, so much criticism that he tried to have a mulligan, and he tried to suspend him again. And obviously the NFLPA took that to court. They actually won that in arbitration, got it overturned. Then you had the Greg Hardy incident. You had the Adrian Peterson incident. So all of those were sort of like bam, 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 and the league got so much bad publicity. Roger Goodell kind of unilaterally said, hey, I'm going to start this at a baseline of 6 games. But really, it wasn't collectively bargained, and it's only one guy saying this is my penalty. And he's already gone back on it. If you look at Josh Brown, of the New York Giants, I believe he was suspended for 1 game. So essentially, it's just some guy saying he's going to use the 6-game penalty as a floor, but he doesn't have to. So it really doesn't mean all that much, except to say that they could use it for Nigel Bradham. They probably won't. If I were to guess, I would say he would get suspended for 1, potentially 2 games. But again, the problem with this league and the problem with the personal conduct policy is the lack of consistency.
John, I was actually going to allude to that in terms of the punishment for Nigel Bradham. Is that really something that's going to come down from the NFL, or is it something the Eagles might want to handle internally, considering this new news is coming to light?
No, the Eagles really, that's not the way the NFL works. I mean, they could always do something internally as far as benching him for a game, but that has no impact on the NFL. If he's going to get suspended, it's going to come from the league office, and that's just the way the NFL does these things. So occasionally you'll see somebody get in trouble, and a team will maybe bench him for the first series of the game or bench him for a quarter or something of that nature. But when it comes to suspensions and things like that, that's totally in the hands of Park Avenue and totally in the hands of Roger Goodell.
Wanted to allude to something else now, away from the disciplinary action of Nigel Bradham. Jeff Mosher really recently put something up how the Eagles should actually steer clear from Darrelle Revis. Now, considering the cornerback depth has always been a large question mark for the Eagles over the past couple of years, do you happen to agree with them that going after an aging veteran who basically stunk last year in Darrelle Revis that would seem to be a bad idea for the Eagles? Do you think they are just better off sticking with the young bucks and trying to develop as many of these guys as possible?
Well, it's tough. I mean, I think they need more of a veteran presence at that position. As far as Darrelle Revis specifically, though, I don't think he's a fit for a number of reasons. Number one, he's a descending player, but he's also owed $6 million from the New York Jets. So there's no real need for him to come back and play at sort of a veteran minimum. And I don't think he would. So I think he would be looking for far more money than the Eagles would be willing to offer. If he were willing to come in, though, sure, I would take a look at him. I just don't think that's a possibility. If you see Darrelle Revis in his history and his career, it was constantly betting on himself year after year, making this franchise-level type money. And I just don't think he would be willing to say, I'm already getting $6 million from the New York Jets, so if I'm going to come here, I'd be playing essentially for free. I just don't think that's in his makeup. So before you even get to can he help this football team, I just don't think he's a fit from a financial standpoint.
Over on the offensive side of the football, the Eagles recently named the top offensive line according to Pro Football Focus. Now, there's been a lot of talk about that and whether the Eagles do in fact have the top offensive line, or whether that would belong to the Dallas Cowboys or even another team. John, in your mind, is this team even, or this offensive line specifically, even close to being the top offensive line, considering they've had their struggles at certain spots and also the injury bug, but they did add some depth this year. So in your mind, where do you think this offensive line actually lies in terms of talent throughout the entire league?
Well, I said for a while, Pete and Mike can tell you, it's a top 10 offensive line in this league. I think putting it at number one is sort of a little bit high. It's not in that type of level. But what they're looking at, Pro Football Focus specifically, is consistency across the line, position to position. If you look at the Dallas Cowboys, they have three basically all pros. I mean, Tyron Smith at left tackle, Travis Frederick at center, Zach Martin at right guard. They're all top two, top three. In Martin's case, he's probably the best guard in all of football at their particular positions. And where it kind of falls off is they've lost Doug Free to retirement. They've lost Ronald Leary in free agency, so they have to replace two positions. And in theory, La'el Collins, for instance, would have been a first-round pick if that strange situation didn't develop before the draft a couple of years ago. He's got significant talent, but it's not proven. Jonathan Cooper, former top 10 pick, same thing, significant talent, hasn't been proven. So I think ultimately the Cowboys will be better on the offensive line. I think ultimately Oakland it will be better on the offensive line, but the Eagles have one of the better offensive lines in football. There's no question about that.
Hey, John, you mentioned the Cowboys, so let's talk about them. For those who don't know, John also covers the NFL nationally for FanRag Sports. So Damian Wilson, the linebacker, is now was arrested, charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, is released on bail. This is the same guy who got shot in the face with a paintball last year, I believe. So it seems like the Cowboys, always somebody's getting in trouble, right?
Yeah, it does seem that way. And people are going to make the jokes about the Cowboys, and rightfully so. I mean, when you talk about, for instance, suspensions, which we talked about a potential suspension for Nigel Bradham, I mean, the Cowboys have had multiple suspensions in their front seven for 3 consecutive years now. It's amazing. And, we'll see how this develops. I don't think it's quite as serious as it may seem. It was supposedly backing into a space at a concert and maybe flashed a gun at some point, getting into an argument, which is certainly stupid, but it doesn't read quite as serious as it might be. So we'll see how that shakes out. But there's no doubt the Cowboys have been that type of team, and Jerry Jones is, wore it on his sleeve. He believes in second chances, but at some point when you keep drafting these kind of guys who are susceptible of getting into trouble time and time again, you might want to rethink that policy.
Speaking of Jerry Jones, he tried to steal back the headlines today by announcing that his wife will be the presenter for him when he's inducted into the Hall of Fame.
I thought it was going to be Jimmy Johnson. If they had gin on the stage, it probably would be Jimmy Johnson, and Jerry can. But that's a cheap shot. But look, I always say about Jerry Jones, people are amazed that he's going into the Hall of Fame, and I don't think they understand the contributor part of it, and the fact that there's unquestionably he's a Hall of Famer as far as his contributions to this league. As far as the business aspect of it goes, he's turned into one of, if not the most powerful owners in the sport. He's been a key figure in all the television revenue and the explosion there. That's what he's going in the Hall of Fame as. He's not going into the Hall of Fame as a general manager, as a personnel decision maker. I think people have to understand the difference there.
See, John, it's interesting you mentioned that because for me, I wasn't against Jerry Jones per se getting the Hall of Fame. I just felt that Pat Bowlen should have gotten first. I mean, just my opinion, because I felt that this is a guy who came in, took a franchise that really didn't have a lot of history, helped put them in a position to be a contending team, and basically rebuilt how that city was viewed as well as that franchise.
Well, yeah, I mean, I certainly think he belongs there. I do, you can argue the order of certain contributors. But I can say, as I said, I don't think there's been any more powerful owner in the past 15 years than Jerry Jones, and it's just grown into the past 3 or 4. I mean, he's got his tentacles basically in every new stadium in this country through another one of his businesses. So he's had a huge, huge impact on the league as a whole from a business perspective, and that's big from obviously his other owners who have a tremendous amount of respect for him.
John, you write over at FanRag Sports. You were talking about, for those who don't know, FanRagSports.com is where John McMullen's the NFL columnist for them. John, you write about Marvin Lewis, and this is something that I'm actually surprised you wrote about.
Still employed by the Bengals.
Because I think Marvin Lewis is like 1 degree above Jeff Fisher. I don't understand how this guy is still in the NFL. And I understand in your article you mentioned the fact that he's had guys on his staff like Hugh Jackson, Jay Gruden, and Mike Zimmer who've gone on to head coaching jobs. But this guy's been there 14 years, 7 playoff appearances in 14 years. He's only had a top 15 defense in 7 of those 14 years. Comes from a defensive background, and yet he always has guys in trouble himself. He brings in malcontents. The team has not been really that great, and to me, I think it might be a good thing for Cincinnati to have a change of the man in charge, maybe see if this franchise can maybe get to another level. But you argue in your article, John, that sometimes when you get rid of a guy, who you replace him with isn't always the right guy.
Yeah, and I think you also have to understand the situation. In a normal environment, I would agree with you. I would say, Andy Reid was a good example here in Philadelphia. I thought the shelf life was over. I didn't think Andy Reid was a bad coach. I just thought it was time to move on and time to go in a different direction. But the Eagles are run like a more traditional franchise. I don't think a lot of people realize how Mike Brown runs the Cincinnati Bengals. And we just talked about Jerry Jones. When you talk about the purse strings of an organization, everybody talks about the salary cap because it's the same for everybody. But there is no salary cap, for instance, in hiring personnel people, hiring assistant coaches, getting a first-class facility like the Star that the Cowboys have in Frisco. The Cleveland Browns have always pinched pennies. They've always been about the bottom line, and that's how they run that organization. So you have to realize that Marvin Lewis is hamstrung in a lot of ways compared to other teams. And you pointed out, I think the Jeff Fisher comparison is unfair. You're talking about Jeff Fisher 7-9, 7-9, 7-9. Cincinnati Bengals had made the postseason 5 consecutive years, which was a franchise record. That's not a a team steeped in a winning tradition. Last year, they kind of fell off to 6-9-1. But the point being, continuity has worked. Marvin Lewis is so well respected. That's why I brought up the coaches, Zimmer, Gruden, Hugh Jackson, even Vance Joseph. He got put on the fast track to getting the Denver job when he was in Cincinnati as the defensive backs coach. People in this league have so much respect for Marvin Lewis and know what he's accomplished despite the obstacles put in front of him in Cincinnati. I guarantee the next coach is not able to accomplish what he's been able to accomplish.
John McMullen with us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. So you talked about Cincinnati and how they pinch pennies, and then Nick asked you earlier about the Eagles' ranking for their offensive line being ranked number 1 by Pro Football Focus. Here's a ranking, John, that you don't want to lead, and that is dead money. That list is out and how much dead money each team owes, and the Eagles are ranked 6th overall with $14 million in dead money owed. Of course, that's the guaranteed money left over on contracts of players who are cut and traded. I'm just looking through the list, John, and it's Chargers, Ravens, Jets, Saints, Cowboys. They owe the most dead money. Raiders, Broncos, Bengals, Seahawks, and Bucks owe the least dead money. I know that that's a list the Eagles necessarily don't want to lead in, correct?
No, generally when you have a lot of dead money, it's because you made poor personnel decisions. So obviously it's not a list you want to be at the top of or near the top of. I think, people will spin it in a positive direction, saying how he's still trying to dig out from the Chip Kelly era. I think that's part of it. I don't think that's all of it. Howie generally cobbles together contracts that if they do go south and the players don't live up to expectations, he's not going to be affected. The team's not going to be affected greatly years past. And I think as we get farther and farther away from Chip Kelly, that'll sort of head downward, and they'll be at least in the middle or bottom of the league. But certainly, everybody misses on certain personnel moves, and it's never good to have a lot of dead money, obviously, because that's money you can't use towards your salary cap.
John, I was reading about today, and this is going to upset certain NFL teams, but David Jeremiah of the NFL Network is reporting that several close sources to Sam Darnold of UFC wouldn't be surprised if he plays 2 more seasons at USC and doesn't come out for the 2018 NFL Draft, which, if that's true, it's going to make a lot of people in the Jets franchise probably cry. But why should we be surprised, though? Because didn't Matt Barkley, he was lined up potentially be the top overall pick or one of the top overall picks. He went back to college as well. So, maybe this is just a USC thing.
Yeah, and I don't know why that was such a big deal today, because he's mentioned that possibility before, long before today, and everyone in the NFL has known about it. I think it has to do more about the situation. And, if it is the New York Jets, for instance, with the number 1 overall pick, and he's projected to be that pick, which he is now, but it's very, very early, and things happen. We see it all the time. You mentioned Matt Barkley. Most recently, last year, it was Deshaun Kaiser. A couple years ago, it was Teddy Bridgewater. All these people at one point early in the process were the number 1 ranked players on the board. That doesn't mean you're going to be number 1 after a college season, after the combine, after the pro day. A lot can happen when people start to pick apart your film and look at holes. So I think he's just keeping his options open, and I think that's smart. If you are going to be, however, rated as the number 1 player on the board and you're going back to college, that's stupid. That's not a good decision. And ultimately, I think if Sam is there and he's number 1 and he's projected to go to the New York Jets at that position, I think he's going to declare for the draft.
And for those who are out there listening, so we're talking about, it was Matt Leinart, it was Matt Barkley, and Carson Palmer all stayed for the duration of their college careers before coming to the NFL. So if Sam Darnold does similar, Pete, it wouldn't be that much different.
And somehow we keep coming back to simple minds and stupid. And this is our conversation today with John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider and a national NFL columnist.
I think that's a veiled shot at me, Pete.
No. The simple minds are not in this room or on this radio station right now. They're elsewhere, buddy. I'm telling you. Hey, before we let you go, it's that time of year. You know, we're what now? 19 days till training camp, I guess it is. So we do try to scratch a little bit deeper below the surface for fun things to talk about. And ESPN did put out a list of best broadcasting prospects for every NFL team because Tony Romo and Jay Cutler are making the leap to television this offseason. So they went through and ranked every team of who they thought the best prospect would be. Can you guess the Eagles prospect, or did you see the article?
I did not see the article. Boy, that's an interesting question. I'm trying to see if you talk about guys who just are really well-spoken. I would say number one would be, and I know they're not going to go this way, but to me it would unquestionably be Jordan Matthews. I mean, if you ask that guy a question, he will go off on a 30-minute dissertation, and it will be an intelligent one. I think he's a great communicator. I think he would be tremendous at it, but obviously he's a very young guy. He's not in that type of situation. Who did they go with?
That's your guy, McManus, by the way, that did the ranking, and they went with Malcolm Jenkins, which makes sense, too, since he's always got the bow tie on. It looks sharp for TV, and he's a pretty good speaker in his own right. It was Malcolm Jenkins for the Eagles. Jason Witten was the guy they nominated for the Cowboys. Brandon Marshall from the Giants, and then the Redskins nomination was Will Blackman. So a couple of safeties there on that list, John McMullen.
Yeah, I would say there's no question Malcolm is also in that category. He would certainly be top five. I think Zach Ertz would be in that category as a guy who really communicates well. I think Jordan Hicks is in that category. So there's a number of guys, but I would go Jordan Matthews above anyone else.
Zach Ertz in that body issue, ESPN, the body issue, John, you got to check that out. Him and Julie Ertz.
I was looking at his wife. I can't say that. I hope Zach didn't hear that, but I was looking more at his wife.
You and me both, pal. It's John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider and national NFL columnist for FanRagSports.com. He joins the show each day at this time, and he'll be back with us again tomorrow. Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, guys.